Yesterday I was just reading my feedback from the students from the last semester, and one of the courses I teach, which is finance, many of the students really liked it, and I'll give you a good example of the feedback. This professor gives a lot of homework, but I realize that if I don't do the homework and work the problems, I'll never really understand the process. It's another one that says, this guy gives a level of homework that is insane, and this is like, I would consider him an outlier. Maybe he's the one that's really seeing things right. But so I get a 5 on the one end, and I get a 1 on the other end. And I would go crazy if I were a politician and try to please them all. I wouldn't please anybody. So the idea is, no matter what you do, you've got to be prepared for feedback for people that say, this isn't working for me. But if you try to hit all of the styles here, and you try to give each style of learning some of the benefits of that style, or some of the characteristics that are consistent with that style, I think you'll get pretty good feedback and pretty good learning. When I teach in the corporate world, I have to admit it's a little bit different. It's much more like the graduate world. When I go to the corporate world and they say, could you teach me negotiating skills, or teach me emotional intelligence or leadership, they are looking for discrete improvement. They're looking for behavioral change that comes out of that meeting, that comes out of that session. One of the classes that I teach pretty regularly in the area for corporations is emotional intelligence. The other I teach is the leadership challenge. And the model that I like to use for those is an experiential model. If I'm teaching finance, for example, I may have 50 or 60 slides in a 3-hour period, because it is basically a lecture. And it's very difficult in finance class, if you're teaching finance, to say, Loretta, tell me how you feel about net income, you know, because it's or if you're teaching math, you know, what do you think about the integral? Is that elegant or not? Well, you know, it's not really relevant. When you're teaching social science like leadership, you can ask questions like, have you ever had a leader who did this? Have you ever worked on a project where this occurred? So when I'm working in the corporate world, it's pretty much a different type of teaching and design. So what I try to follow is this experiential learning model, where first of all I give them an experience. It has to do with them working in groups, videos, use a lot of videos, we discuss things. Certainly there is some component of lecture. That's the what. Now, we're talking about leadership, and I'm talking about modeling the way, which would be one of the characteristics of leadership that I would talk about. So I give them the what, but I don't want to stop there because they're looking for improvement. The what is just more or less the theoretical. Then I want to be able to generalize. If you model the way, then you are going to have increased productivity in your organization. Your employees will like you better, and you'll get promoted faster. That's the so what, and we're almost there, but we're not quite there. The last thing is the now what, and that's when we close the loop with the experiential model. What it says is, you've now learned the concept, you know why it's important, now I'm going to give you an assignment to go away and come back and tell me how you're going to apply this in your organization. For example, if we're talking about modeling the way or role modeling, I'm going to ask each student to give me a plan on how they're going to implement some of the things that we talked about, and that'll be their deliverable for that. The experiential model is a little bit different in the classroom setting, although not radically so, because you can use some of these techniques in almost any setting. It's a little bit more difficult when you're teaching something on the quantitative side, although not radically so. So that's the experiential model. That's the model that I like to use when I'm dealing with the corporate world or dealing with an organization that actually is looking for some behavioral improvement. When I think about developing the course, I've got my content that I'm thinking about. One of the things that gives me the greatest deal of trouble is I've only got 42 hours of classroom time that I can spend, and I have a limited amount of time. I can't get thousands of hours of student engagement outside that. So I've got to think about the scope. There's no one in here, I would guess, that is always able to teach everything they want to. You always leave something on the table because there's this one thing you wanted to teach and you just ran out of time. I try to refine that by using discrete learning objectives with active verbs in them. And I try to use more synthetic types of verbs, like learn how to synthesize two types of information to come up with a decision point. Learn how to integrate different cultures in an organization to create a compatible culture with the mission, that sort of things. Then I begin to look at the course material. This is probably where I have the most fun because I get to look at videos and I get to preview books and things like that and try to incorporate as much as I can. In my finance course, for example, I found that the Wall Street Journal has been very, very good at, they've even set up a website, not just for me. Although maybe it was for me, who knows, you know. It's like the Windows thing, right? Yeah, I designed Windows 7. Well, I designed Wall Street Journal. Now, they have for finance professors and people that do economics, they have a special site with lots of really good stuff that the students seem to enjoy because it's so current, it's so topical. Even with things like ethics, I can't wait for next semester to start because this whole BP oil spill thing, I mean, I could spend the whole semester just talking about that because the ethics of, you know, how could you build a question would be, how could you build an oil rig with almost a mile of pipeline and not have a backup plan? I'm envisioning a scenario where I'm going to turn on the TV next June of 2011, and we'll see a reporter saying, and BP is trying their latest attempt to stop the flow. I mean, it's a comedy of errors. And then with the course material, what material do I have to actually develop? Do I have to go do some research on things of that nature? That's where I have a lot of fun as well. And then evaluate the approach. As we go through the course, you're going to always find things that work, things that don't work, and then finalize it and refine it as we go through the process. Now, delivery techniques that I've found work for me. First of all, you almost can never get away from a lecture, even if it's just a few minutes of setup information. I don't like to lecture as much as I used to because I find that lectures are pretty boring. I've listened to my lectures, and I'm pretty boring. So what I need to do, what I've found is I need to get the salient points out there. I need to get people engaged. I need to use techniques that are appropriate for the lecture, but not everything is. And I try to keep the material as similar as that. To me, this is almost a perfect graphic because now I can say, I got my notes here, but I'm not really using them. I can say what I want to about lectures. I can talk about whatever story comes to mind. But it engages you because each of you sees that picture a little bit differently. And each of you is drawn into the picture a little bit differently. Now, I could have done it differently. I could have put some bullets on the left side and the picture on the right, but I did a little bit differently for this. I've also found, and I learned this also from Exceed, that there are about 5 or 6 different questioning strategies, some of which are effective in some situations, some of which aren't. One of the great questioning strategies, as I mentioned, is to open up a session with a question and get the students to start thinking about the question throughout. I try to avoid as much as I can cold calling on a question on a student or a particular student. I might cold call the class, but I'm always fearful of being like Ben Stein in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. You know, anyone? So I'm afraid I don't use silence as well as I should. But questioning strategies can be really, really good. In fact, someday I'll have the courage to show up and teach a class in the true Socratic method. And I got some ideas here earlier today that I'm going to try to engage a little bit more of the questioning. Giving people, one of the things that seems to work for me is handing out a 3 or 4 question type of quiz to get the students to spend 5 minutes answering it and go through and talk about the questions. I also find the case study approach, when I assign case studies, I assign them to specific individuals to answer specific questions. Now, I used to just assign the case studies to everybody, and that just doesn't work because you got 2 or 3 of your eager beavers who always answer the question, and 28 or 29 that are going to try to skate through the presentation. So what I do is discreetly assign everybody in the class a certain number for each semester, and that seems to work pretty well. That even works really well. It works even better in distance learning. I've found if you're going to do any kind of a feedback, giving students time to prepare seems to get a better answer than if you're extemporaneous. And I'm not saying I don't use extemporaneous questions in the Teletechnet or the broadcast. But what I'm saying is have some format where they know exactly what the question is and they know what their answer should be. It makes them a little bit more confident when they come on, and you get more robust answers. I agree with what was said earlier. Group work is a great learning tool, both in the class and also outside the class. What I do find is when you have group work in the class, that it tends to really engage the students a lot more than if they were to sit there for 3 hours and just listen to you lecture or watch. What I try to do in the very first session of any class that's live is I have students pair up in groups of 2 or 3 and interview one another in like the first 2 minutes. And the idea behind that, the research shows, and my experience also shows, that if you can get people to actually start verbalizing anything in the first early part of a session, they will talk. If you don't, as I mentioned earlier, if you don't get them to say anything, they're probably going to shut down. So the idea is get them up, get them energetic, get them moving around. If you can get them to just getting up and changing seats, moving to a different location, anything that gets the energy flowing is going to work. I really like group presentations too. Many students hate these, and one of the reasons I like them is because they do hate them. I didn't come out the way I meant it to be. I have a firm belief that you do not learn in your comfort zone. Students do not like the idea of presentations. Now, I have my undergrads do presentations as well, and if you really want to put the pressure on them and really want to tweak their minds, not only give them a presentation to give, but only give them 10 minutes to do it in. Now, anybody can stand up like me and talk for 45 minutes about anything. But as Benjamin Franklin once said to one of his compatriots, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. It really causes the students to think about what they're going to say. And one of the things that really delighted me this semester in an undergraduate ethics course that I taught was how much the students were noticing my presentation style. I also give them a short tutorial on presentation style, many of whom just ignore it. But many of whom didn't, and I found that many of them were showing up with pictures, and they didn't. Now, some of them showed up with paragraphs of data and read them and read to the screen. Not everybody's going to get your message, but some did. In my mind, if 20% of the people in the class actually get your message, I'm thrilled. I really am. So group work really, I think, works out well. I don't use it in every situation, but I think it is a pretty powerful tool to use, and it gets people engaged, in particular with live classes. Media and technology, I should add media and technology to this because they, from my mind, go kind of hand in hand. I try to use as much media to engage people as I possibly can. I certainly use a lot of audio or a lot of video when I can find the video. If I can't find the video, I find the audio. When you go back to one of our greatest speakers of all time as president was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Very, very difficult to find a good audio-visual recording, but the audios are there, and they teach things like vision and cultural awareness. I have a speech that I use in my leadership class from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he gave his I Have a Dream speech. Now, the only problem with that is you can't get the video. You can get the video, but it's like one of those old movies where he's talking and he stops talking and the words keep going. It's not in sync. So you have to use the audio with pictures, and it really works well. Any kind of a handout, any kind of a visual, anything that engages people, I find is very useful. Case study videos that are particularly useful in my mind. Several organizations have actually created videos with case studies to engage students in engineering ethics. And you have the presentation, you have a real live problem, well-produced problem, and then you pause and ask questions about the case and exactly what's going on. What would you do if you were the engineer? And I find that the choice of media can be very, very powerful in